The next session. So the next session is taught by Alison Eaton. Alison is a retired senior police officer, now a national and international trainer on gender-based violence. She also trains for Safe Lives, which is a charity who deliver the DA Matis training, domestic abuse. So DA is domestic abuse training to police around the UK. If you've ever worked on domestic cases, you'll probably have noticed the anticlimax and frustration that comes with them when they seemingly go nowhere. So you want to help a victim, the victim doesn't accept the help. You get frustrated with this DA incident and with future DA incidents because this is something that repeats over time when you work in DA. And that means you don't deliver your best policing possibly because you're not quite sure how to when the victim you're wanting to protect doesn't seem to want your help. You've probably wondered, why doesn't she leave? It seems like the most logical and easy solution to a problem from the outside. And Alison will tell you why they can't just leave. And she will also tell you how you can still support them. Okay, so let's play this next session.
I was a senior police officer for 30 years. I'm now a national and international trainer and consultant in the areas of sexual and domestic violence and abuse. I also quality assure domestic homicide reviews from across the country for the Home Office. We're going to look at, in the next 10 minutes or so, why victims of domestic abuse don't leave their partner. And it's all about understanding the complexities of domestic abuse. And I want to start opening up with this very impactful slide. All the figures represent a woman killed by a partner or family member on one day around the world. That's 137 women across the world on average. And the home is the most likely place for a woman to be killed. Statistics for us, on average 2 women every week across England and Wales are killed by a current or former male partner. And the ONS statistics show 80 women were killed by a current or ex-partner between April 18 and March 19. And that's a 27% increase then. And we know it's increased further due to the COVID restrictions. I review 2 to 3 domestic homicide reviews per month, and there are 5 of us doing that. So these figures are a devastating reminder of why it's so important for victims experiencing domestic abuse to have that support and somewhere safe to escape to when they can. Women are most likely to be killed by their partner or ex-partner. And as part of the analysis that we are doing with 124 domestic homicide reviews between 2016 and 2019, obviously pre-COVID, 67% are killed by a partner or ex-partner. And then on average, 75% of domestic abuse murders happen at the point of separation. And about 80% of those are in the first 4 months. So we know that leaving an abuser can be one of the most dangerous times. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the DASH risk assessment. And we go to question 6. Have you separated or tried to separate from your partner within the past year? The highest risk in the first 4 months. And comments back. If I can't have you, nobody can. If you were ever to leave me, I'll kill the kids. I know from my experience that police become frustrated and disillusioned dealing with domestic abuse incidents and crimes. And I would often hear, or officers would say to me, the victim was uncooperative, the victim was hostile. There's limited corroboration. It's a one-on-one allegation. There's drugs involved, there's alcohol involved. The victim's going to retract. And you may also be asking yourself, dealing with domestic abuse, why does she stay with him? Why doesn't she just get away from the abuse? Why can't she just leave? Sadly, it's just not that simple. And I'm sure you're familiar with the common barriers to reporting: fear, shame, isolation, not being believed, being blamed. But this is all underpinned by the influence of coercive, controlling behaviour. This is the power and control wheel, a tool to explain abusive and controlling behaviours of the perpetrator of domestic abuse, how they're controlling the victim and the children. And there's 8 different abuser tactics. And then round the outside, you've got physical and sexual violence. The original power and control wheel was developed by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Program in Duluth in America back in the 1980s. It's been around since then. It's such an important tool also to help victims recognise any of the warning signs. And also we've got the stages of patterns of coercive controlling behaviour, which have been adapted to help you as police to understand when it's best to intervene and when it's best for you to try and support that victim. A timeline of coercive controlling behaviour that does go up and down. Grooming, early stages of the relationship, and this is with the isolation. Police, you won't often be aware of it. Victim just trying to keep safe. You might get called to the address, but the victim, when you get there, won't want to engage at this point. They're not being deliberately obstructive or uncooperative. They are just trying to manage the situation in a way that makes them feel safe. So by the time the police arrive, the immediate danger, the immediate abuse has passed, and now they're minimising what's happened because they truly believe this is the safest approach for them at this time. And all you can do then is leave contact details. Victims then start blaming themselves for the abuse, try and challenge this issue of blame. And then victims further down the line might start to acknowledge what is happening to them is actually abuse, and they may begin to reevaluate the relationship, which could lead to the victim starting then to consider leaving being a reality and then engaging in formal support for the victim. And it's important at this stage that the safety planning is put in place and the victim is supported. We know ending a relationship doesn't equate to ending the violence and the abuse. And the point following separation, we've already discussed, is the most dangerous. Victims' fear of losing their children. Perpetrators use this to maintain control. We talk about invisible chains. Many women are so controlled that leaving is simply not an option. The control is often invisible to onlookers. Others may even consider the couple are quite happy, but behind closed doors, things can be very different. With a controlling partner, there are not only the barriers to the victim leaving, but also barriers to fully disconnecting once they've left. And these restrictions are the invisible chains. Women can feel so trapped and be rendered so powerless by controlling, coercive, manipulative behaviours of their abusers. The inability to simply walk away can be linked inextricably with the amount of power an abuser has. A totally controlling partner is not going to let the victim leave and be free of him. He intends to punish the victim, if not destroy or kill her, to maintain his sense of power. It's as simple as that. So what do we think victims are going to gain from leaving? Their safety, free from abuse and control, rebuild their self-esteem and confidence, reconnect with family and friends, and their children will no longer see the abuse. However, most of these gains are abstract, hypothetical, they're not certain. They can take time, 8 months, a year, or even more. They can lead to a problematic road ahead. They're only probable and they're not definite. This is when their safety is most at risk. What do victims stand to lose from leaving? Their loss of their home, financial support, leave the area they know, their personal contact details change, their children have to change school. These losses are certain, immediate, and they're all practical. And we look at the most important gain of safety and freedom from further abuse. This has to be balanced against the statistical fact that leaving is so dangerous. So what can you do? Police officers, response officers, investigators. Going back to my force, Robert Conlon. Robert Conlon was brought to my attention by concerned response officers due to the number of calls to the address, the escalation that was going on, and their absolute concern that Robert Conlon was going to end up killing the victim, his partner. The victim couldn't find the strength to support a prosecution. So what did we do? Evidence-based prosecution using body-worn video, officer statements, witnesses, family, work colleagues, friends, neighbours. They all knew what was going on. So it's about considering all the evidence gathering opportunities from every call to the police. And here's some extracts from the media releases at the time. So first person then to be charged with the offence of coercive controlling behaviour. Due to the strength of the evidence, he pleaded guilty and he was sentenced to 4.5 years. Further sentences of 6 months because he was contacting the victim while he was on remand in prison. He was still trying to exert control in prison and he was succeeding. When Conlon was finally sentenced, the victim went up to the officers and she thanked them. She thanked them for giving her life back. Victims leaving need the support to do so. Of note, through the current analysis of our domestic homicide reviews that we're looking at, where the victims had been murdered just after leaving, issues we saw in many of those where perpetrators had found out the place where the victim was living. Some of this was through child contact, some of it wasn't. And also there were cases where the victims were in the process of getting their locks changed, but it had not yet happened. It's so important not to delay this. So multi-agency support is needed. We speak about the MARAC, we speak about domestic violence, prevention notices and orders, and also, of course, we've got the domestic abuse bill going through. It's actually at the House of Lords at the moment and all those changes. So I'm just going to finish by mentioning DA Matters, Domestic Abuse Matters Change Programme for police. It's training given to police forces across the UK. I've personally delivered in over 10 forces. It's about transforming the response to domestic abuse, ensuring coercive, controlling behaviour is better understood by frontline staff. There's a map. The pink shows all the forces that have actually adopted the DA Matters training, with the black going to be shortly taking it up. And there is a list of forces. And some feedback. I just wanted to point out that top one. I have asked, why don't they leave? Why don't they leave to protect the children? I have a far better understanding of why people do not leave. So if you haven't had this training in your force, I would recommend it. So we asked the question, why victims of domestic abuse don't leave their partners? The gains the victims hope for are long-term, abstract and hard to get, whereas the risks and losses are immediate, practical and more likely. Officers need to support victims by looking at all evidence gathering opportunities. So hopefully I've given you some understanding of how difficult it is for a victim to leave and the support that needs to be put in place around them when they do.
So that was Alison's session, and bit of a downer, bit of a heavy subject, but that's what we deal with in policing. I don't think there were any questions about this particular session. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments and start it with a Q. So let me give you my summary of what we've just seen. Okay, so as I said, I'm taking out the key learning points for you, so you don't have to make any notes. Women are most likely to be killed by a partner or ex-partner. If you work in the police, you know that already. 75% of DA murders happen at or after separation, and 80% of those happen in the first 4 months after separation. And that in itself seems like a good enough reason, almost, not to leave. Okay, so that's one of the reasons. So, victims may not know this, but we know the statistics. So, if we're saying, well, why don't you just leave? We need to keep in mind that would actually be a potentially more dangerous thing for the victim to do than to stay. Not cooperating with police may seem like the safest option to the victim, but do leave your contact details, okay? And it's quite important how you, as the police officer who's interacting with that victim, engage with her. So if you come across as someone who doesn't believe, who blames, who questions, who pushes, that will not make a good impression. If you are someone who's very full of empathy, who's very understanding, builds a lot of rapport, and you just make sure that you're always a safe person for the victim to speak to, whether she or he wants to make a report or not, then if the victim does get ready to do something about it, knowing that someone is in the police who's good to speak to, as in you, will possibly encourage that. Challenge the safe blaming. So let me just close the window here. So similar with victims of sexual abuse, it is unfortunately also a trait of domestic abuse victims that they tend to blame themselves. Challenge that, okay? Just let the victim understand that it's not their fault. The pros of leaving are all long-term. What the victim is trying to achieve, what the victim is trying to gain by not leaving, that's a long-term thing. And it's not certain, and it's abstract and hypothetical. Whereas if the victim does leave, the cons of leaving, so to speak, they're immediate, practical, existential. Many people are dependent financially on their partner and materialistically, and they're far more likely, these losses are far more likely to happen, and to happen quicker, and they're highly dangerous because, as we saw, leaving was dangerous. And what you can do then is, apart from leaving contact details, leaving a lasting good impression as an officer, as somebody representing the police, or whichever organization you work with, and you come across that victim. Make a good impression, build rapport, be trustworthy, make them feel understood, make them feel heard, and make them feel believed. Okay, and challenge every time that they blame themselves. And in terms of actually getting a prosecution together, Alison was giving that case from her own force. Get the evidence from everywhere else. If the victim doesn't provide evidence, get the evidence from everywhere else. Get the statements from neighbors, colleagues, friends, family. A lot of things do go on behind closed doors, but some people may know. The friends of the victim may know that, he never lets her go outside. He never lets her do this. He never lets her do that. She had to stop seeing them. She's not allowed to stay out beyond a certain time. She can't, get a lift home with one of her friends. He always wants to pick her up and, make sure he knows exactly where she is all the time. Get those kinds of statements because they get the evidence of that pattern of behavior. Like sexual assault, this is a coercive controlling relationship. It's not an incident. It's a whole pattern of behavior. Right. Okay. So that was Alison's session. Again, if you want to be able to look back on all the teaching that you've seen today, all the sessions you've seen today, I've put them all into an ebook together for you. And you can also get a certificate of attendance for this, but you need to register for the conference in the policesciencedoctor.com/RFC for rapid fire conference link. And when you are a subscriber using that link, you will also get the discounted link for the ebook later.